Good morning to all. Today's topic for discussion is management of traumatic spinal cord injuries in adults. Uh, 90% of all the spinal cord injuries is trauma. The traumatic spinal cord injury is a temporary or permanent neurological deficit attributable to disruption of the normal functioning of the spinal cord. It can be due to road traffic accident or gunshot wounds. It can manifest with motor, sensory, or autonomic manifestation. Coming to the incidence, in United States, 40.1 cases per million citizens per year is reported. In Europe, there is 12 to 58 cases per million per year is reported. In Middle East and North Africa, 23.2 cases per million per year is reported. And in Asia, we can see 10 to 56 cases per million per year is reported. Historically speaking, males are affected more than females, and mostly it is due to road traffic accidents, and younger patients are affected most of the time. A growing elderly population is affected nowadays. This is due to the propensity for falls, and it can be seen in case of Japan, where there is a peak incidence of spinal cord injuries traumatic in 50 to 59 years of age. This is due to the high prevalence of congenital stenosis and ossification of the posterior longitudinal ligament in the cervical spine of Japanese citizens. Coming to the short description of anatomy, the spinal cord as such occupies approximately 35% of the canal at the level of the atlas and 50% of the canal in the lower cervical spine and thoracolumbar segment. The remainder of the canal is filled with epidural fat, cerebrospinal fluid, and dural matter. The conus medullaris represents the caudal termination of the spinal cord. It contains the sacral and coccygeal myelomeres and lies dorsal to the L1 body and L1 to L2 intervertebral disc. And the cauda equina represents the motor and sensory roots of the lumbosacral myelomeres. These roots are less likely to be injured because they have more room in the canal and are not tethered to the same degree as the spinal cord. Furthermore, the motor neuron roots are composed of lower motor neurons, which are more resilient to injury than the upper motor neurons of the brain and spinal cord. Coming to the mechanism of the traumatic injuries, it can be due to the primary injury and secondary injury. Primary injury are due to the mechanical forces. It can be either direct or indirect. It can make both direct and indirect cord damage. Coming to the secondary injuries, it is mainly due to the sequelae of the primary injury. In direct injury, the disruption of the protective osteoligament structure surrounding the cord can happen. It will lead to cord damage, usually caused by transient or permanent compression and distraction, shearing from acceleration or deceleration, or rarely transduction can also happen at the level of the cord. In the case of indirect injury, there will be a transmission of kinetic energy to the neural tissue. The spinal cord injury occurs without any fracture at this point of time. For example, in the cervical cord syndrome, the hyperextension injury, in the case of cervical cord syndrome, there will be hyperextension injury in the elderly patient. And in that there will not be any kind of trauma to the spine. The secondary injury, as I already said, is the sequelae of the primary injury. First of all, there will be a disruption of the microvascular structure leading to microhemorrhages can happen. It will damage to the cells causing necrosis and promote release of cytokines. And there will be free radical release, and glutamate will also be released. This excess glutamate causes local excitor toxicity. In this segment, we can have three phases. First is early acute phase, then second one is subacute phase, and there will be chronic phase. In the early acute phase, it is known as the 48 hours after the injury happens. There will be vascular destruction and hemorrhage and edema. There will be vasospasm and the thrombosis happen. This necrosis of the neural tissue can happen due to hypoxia at this point. Then there will be demyelination and Wallerian degeneration occurs in the affected axon. After early acute phase, there is a phase known as subacute phase. It is defined as a phase leading to reach of the injury. There will be local astrocyte proliferation as a result of the release of local cytokines, and this initiates development of gliosis. The gliosis progresses over 6 months following injury. This is known as the intermediate phase with scar maturation and sprouting of axon. The glial scar prevents axonal degeneration as it acts as a chemical and physical barrier. Next, there will be some phase known as chronic phase. In this phase, this phase is defined as phase which is more than 6 months of the injury. In this phase, patient can also present with syringomyelia. The problem, the cause for the syringomyelia is this is due to the tissue damage during the enlarged perivascular and extracellular phase, and that disrupted in a high cervical injury, there will be impairment of respirations. In the case of high cervical injury, injuries above the C3 vertebrae are usually fatal because with high cervical spinal cord injuries, the effect of the on respiration is latent. Because the diaphragm is innervated by C3 to C5 segments, and skeletal muscles is innervated by C4 to C8 segments, and sternocleidomastoid mastered by C1 to C4, and intercostal muscles by T1 to T11. All these muscles are helping in the respiration of the person. So when there is a high cervical injury, these muscles can be paralyzed. Thus, hypoxia is a major issue during the initial management of patients with some such injuries, and achieving early intubation and ventilation is very important. And there will be disruption of the descending vasomotor pathways, and it can cause a systemic hypotension due to the decreased peripheral vascular resistance. So the patient can be presented with a bradycardia. This is due to the unopposed parasympathetic innervation of the cardiac sinoatrial node with the vagal nerve. The patient may undergo a neurogenic shock phase. It is happening usually occurs above T6 injuries as the sympathetic cardiac innervations arises on to T1 to T6. So in the management of a traumatic spinal cord injury, there is something known as initial resuscitation and definite management. The initial resuscitation will be starting from the site of the injury, and at the site of the injury, the caregiver should suspect the spinal cord injury, and it should be transported to the patient in a the patient should be transported to the hospital in a safer way. So during the transport, the spinal cord alignment is very important. A spinal board is used during transfer, and it should be support the patient until a spinal injury has been ruled out. But there is an exception known as in the case of fixed spinal deformities like ankylosing spondylosis, and the patient should be immobilized in the position of the deformity. Else, a cervical collar should be applied if this can be done safely. If the patient's neck is in a non-anatomical position and the patient is conscious, then they can be encouraged to try to move their neck into a normal position. But if the patient is unable to do so due to pain or a neurological deficit or a decreased conscious level, the neck should be left its injured position and immobilized in sandbags and tape alone without applicating a collar. And the definitive management will start, of course, from the time of the admission to the hospital. At the time of the admission, the patient should be prioritized, and that means the patient should be given the utmost priority. The immediate attention to airway and ensure adequate proper aeration should be ensured so that the ischemia can be avoided. Patient with the C5 to T6 injury maintain airway initially, but they will not maintain the airway later. So maintenance of anatomical alignment of the C-spine is important. Meanwhile, the patient can be intubated. So I have already told about the hypotension. So how to avoid hypotension is a problem. So as this will compound the primary insult to the spinal cord due to poor perfusion and ischemia, fluid resuscitation and vasodilators may be necessary to maintain systolic blood pressure, especially during intubation and with positive pressure ventilation, as these can cause hypotension and bradycardia. So patient who is undergoing neurogenic shock is due to the peripheral vascular dilatation. Patient can be presented with a flushed, patient can appear flushed with a warm skin, and patient can also present with the priapism. It is due to the vascular dilatation. Patient in a neurogenic shock can typically present with hypotension with bradycardia. So patient with the spinal cord injuries above T6 need agents with the inotropic and chronotropic effect. This is to tackle the disruption in the cardiac sympathetic activity and also to produce vasoconstrictive, which is lost due to disrupted sympathetics. For example, in the case of neurogenic shock, patient who is having lesion above T6 can be given noradrenaline or dobutamine. For spinal cord injuries below T6, an inotropic and chronotropic effect is not required, and patient can maintain the BP by using phenylephrine. The effect of neurogenic shock may persist for 1 to 5 weeks following injury. A bladder catheterization is usually necessary in the context of spinal cord injury as the patient is unable to mobilize and also in order to monitor fluid balance of the patient. So after admission of the patient and prioritizing, we have to go for a radiological diagnosis. After the initial resuscitation, urgent imaging is done. Classically, we are using an X-ray of X-ray, but CT and MRI can also be done meanwhile. X-ray is a quick screening tool to look for obvious spinal fractures or gross dislocation. But nowadays, CT is superseded the X-ray, and in United Kingdom, according to NICE 10 guidelines, they advise a CT of the spine for patients where there is a suspicion of spinal cord injury. For after the X-ray, we can do a CT. This CT provided the details of the type and location of the spinal column fracture, which is vital in classifying the type of fracture, and it is involved in major anatomical structures. Despite its sensitivity and diagnosing the bony fracture, CT is a poor examination tool for soft tissue structures such as spinal cords, intervertebral discs, and spinal ligaments. After CT, it is important to organize an MRI of the spine of any patient with suspicion of a spinal cord injury. This is due to two important reasons. Firstly, it is a formal diagnostic tool for the spinal cord injuries and understand the severity of injury. A number of radiological parameters, including the degree of compression, intramedullary hemorrhage, and cord swelling, can also be shown to correlate with the neurological outcome. Secondly, an MRI is crucial in determining management approaches in patients with spinal cord injury and cervical facet dislocation. Coming to the classification system of spinal cord injury, the classification system of spinal cord injury, currently we are using international standard for neurological classification of spinal cord injury. This is known as the ASIA scoring. This is the form which is provided for the scoring of the patient. This form is having three components. First is the ASIA motor score, second one is the ASIA sensory score, and third is ASIA impairment scale with grade that grades the spinal cord injury based upon degree of sensory motor function. In ASIA motor score, this will be examining the muscle power in each myotones, and in ASIA sensory score, this will examine the sensory system with respect to light touch and pinprick sensation of each dermatome from C2 to S4 to or C2 to S5. The recommendation is for the ASIA scale to be assessed acutely as possible after the admission to act as a baseline. So whenever a patient came with suspected spinal cord injury, we should do a ASIA scoring. And according to the ASIA scoring, it is classified into 5. First one is grade A, grade B, grade C, grade D, and grade E. Grade A means there will be complete. That is, there is no motor or sensory function is preserved in the sacral segments. And in grade B, it is incomplete. That is, sensory function is preserved below the level of injury, but no motor function is preserved. In case of grade C, it is incomplete, but the motor function is preserved below the level of injury. But more than half the affected muscles have a grade less than or equal to 3. In grade D, there will be incomplete, but the motor function is preserved below the level of injury. At least half the affected muscles will be having a power greater than 3. So in the case of grade E, there will be there will be a normal functioning system. That is, the motor and sensory function will be normal. According to the ASIA score, there will be ASIA A to ASIA D. First, ASIA A will be having a complete, and the ASIA B to D is incomplete. For incomplete spinal cord injuries, there are different patterns of neurological deficit that can occur based upon the morphology of the injury. This is an overview of the spinal cord tracts. On the A diagram, we can see major spinal cord tracts. It is the motor system. The motor tracts will be descending, and it is depicted in yellow. And the sensory tracts is ascending, and it is depicted in yellow. The motor tract is descending, and it is depicted in yellow, and the sensory tract is ascending, and it is depicted in green. As we already know, the dorsal column pathway is for fine touch and proprioception, and the lateral spinothalamic tract is for pain and temperature, and the ventral spinothalamic tract is for crude touch and itch. In the motor system, there will be lateral corticospinal tract, reticulospinal tract, rubrospinal, vestibulospinal, tectospinal, and ventral corticospinal tract. This diagram is important when we are considering an incomplete cord injury. That is, in the case of incomplete cord injury, there will be central cord syndrome, anterior cord syndrome, posterior cord syndrome. Is the three main important incomplete spinal injuries. In central cord injury, the patient will be an elderly patient with cervical spondylosis most of the time. He will be presenting the casualty with a history of fall in a hyperextended fashion. The syndrome is characterized by preferential weakness on the upper limbs compared to the lower limbs, and it is classically described as man in the barrel syndrome. This can be explained by the somatotropic organization of the corticospinal tract within the cervical fibers, and the cervical fibers are placed more medially. So, the medial fibers are affected when there is an hyperextension injury. However, in practice, this clinical pattern of motor weakness does not always confirm, and there may be weakness in all limbs. Coming to the Brown-Sequard syndrome, most commonly observed in penetrating spinal cord injuries, where the injury happens to one side of the spinal cord. The patient presents ipsilateral weakness and loss of light touch, proprioception, and vibration, but the contralateral loss of temperature and pain sensation will be normal. This is due to the fact that the spinothalamic tract, which carry the pain and that is the lateral spinothalamic tract, which takes the pain and temperature sensation, will be decreasing at the level at which they enter the spine. And in the case of anterior cord syndrome, this can occur due to hyperflexion injuries, especially around the thoracic spine, whether the vascular supply to the cord is where the vascular supply to the cord is vulnerable. The ischemia to the anterior cord leads to motor function, loss of motor function, light touch, and pain and temperature. The posterior column are usually preserved, and thus proprioception and vibration sense remains intact. So after taking this MRI, there are various system of classification for assessing the stability of the spine. And the instability is defined by Whites and Punjabi, like they're defined as the loss of ability of the spine under physiological loads to maintain relationship between vertebrae in such a way that there is neither initial damage nor subsequent irritation to the spinal cord or the nerve roots, and in addition, there is no development of incapacitating deformity or pain due to the structural changes. So the spinal cord stability can be assessed by different methods. The classification system for them is that first is the two-column concept by Holsworth. Second one is the Dennis three-column concept, which is based on CT imaging. And for subaxial cervical spine injury classification for C spines, and thoracolumbar injury classification severity scores for thoracolumbar spine. It is a Whites and Punjabi scoring system for assessing the thoracolumbar spine stability. It is having 6 elements. First is the anterior element, which is unable to function. Second one is the posterior elements unable to function. Third one is the disruption of costovertebral articulations and radiographic criteria and spinal cord or codoaquinal damage and dangerous loading anticipated. Each element is given a point, and if the patient is having a point greater than or equal to 5, will be taken as an unstable thoracic lumbar spine. For lumbar spine stability, these following are the parameters. First is the anterior element unable to function. Second one is the posterior element unable to function. Then there will be radiographic criteria or flexion or extension X-rays, and or the resting X-ray can also be taken. Then the spinal cord or codoaquinal damage, and dangerous loading anticipated. These are the criteria, and they are given a particular amount of point. And if the point which is having greater than or equal to 5 will be taken as a unstable point. This is the Dennis three-column concept. According to Dennis, the spinal system is converted into three parts. First one is the anterior column, second one is the middle column, and third one is the posterior column. The anterior column is covered by the anterior half of the vertebral body and intervertebral disc, along with the anterior longitudinal ligament and annulus fibrosis. And the middle column is composed of the posterior vertebral body and the unconvertible joint, the posterior longitudinal ligament and annulus fibrosis. The posterior column is having posterior neural arches, that is the pedicle, faces, and laminae, and the posterior ligament complex, that is the supraspinous ligament, interspinous ligament, ligamentum flavum, and facet capsules. If the patient who is having a instability in any of the two columns is considered as an unstable spine. This is the thoracolumbar injury classification and severity scoring for thoracolumbar injury instability prediction. It is based upon three categories. First one is a neurological status. It is determined by a clinical examination. Second one is the fracture morphology should be studied. It is mainly by X-ray or CT. Third one is the posterior ligamentous complex integrity is checked by means of MRI. And each system is given a particular score. And if the patient is having a less than or equal to 3 score, can be managed by non-surgical intervention. If the patient is having a score of 4, it will be the choice of the surgeons to provide a surgical intervention or not.
Happy. Incomplete spinal cord injury, that means ASIA B to D, means patient can worsen. That means it requires more weightage. So you will be giving more score. So B to D will be having 3 points. It is actually Vaccaro classification. The person behind this classification is Vaccaro. He is the figure in spine. And ASIA A means patient is having a complete spinal cord injury. There is no further point to deteriorate. That means patient is having 2 scores. And Cauda-Equina syndrome also you can improve when you act quickly. So it is having 3 points. So incomplete injury and Cauda-Equina syndrome has got 3 points. Okay, you can proceed further.
This is the subaxial injury classification and severity scale. This is predicting the need for surgical intervention for subaxial cervical spine fracture. This also has got 3 categories. First is the neurological status, second is the fracture morphology, and third is the integrity of the disco-ligamentous complex.
You can see here it is correctly given. So your first table was wrong.
Yes, sir. This is the, for sake of completion, we are also given an AO classification for spinal cord injury. Type A is a compression injury, type B is distraction injuries, type C is translation injuries. Under AO classification, there are type A to type C. Type A is having a compression injury. And type A 0, then there will be minor or non-constructional fracture. Type A1 will be a wedge compression. Type A2 will be a there will be splitting of the vertebral body. And in type A3, there will be incomplete bursting of the vertebral body. And type A4, there will be a complete burst of the vertebral body. In type B, distraction injury can happen. In type B1, there will be transosseous tension, band disruption, or there will be chance fracture. In type B2, there will be posterior tension band disruption. And type B3, there will be hyperextension type of injury. In type C, there will be translation injury that causing a displacement or dislocation. This is a flowchart I tried to make after understanding when there is a spinal cord injury suspension. Whenever there is a spinal cord injury suspension, first of all, we have to stabilize the patient hemodynamically and mechanically. And the patient will be given prophylaxis for avoiding the deep vein thrombosis. Or the patient can also be given steroids, and the patient can given ulcer prevention methods. And we should go for a imaging of the patient. After taking images, we have to assess the stability of the spine. If the patient is having an unstable spine, as seen in the previous slides, we have to classify whether it is stable or unstable. If the patient is having an unstable spine, we have to go for a definitive management, that is surgical decompression or stabilization. If the patient is having a stable spine, we can go for a conservative treatment. So for the indications for surgeries, like for most of the incomplete spinal cord injuries, there will be we should decompress when patient hits the neurological plateau or is worsening neurologically. The decompression may facilitate nerve root function, return at a level of injury, and it may recover at 1 to 2 levels. For most of the complete spinal cord injuries, we have to stabilize the spine to facilitate rehabilitation and minimize the need for halo or orthosis. Decompression may facilitate nerve root function return at a level of injury, and it may recover 1 to 2 levels. For a patient who is having, some patients may need a intensive care unit. Once admitted the acute spinal cord injury, the patient will be typically managed in an intensive care unit. So in the intensive care unit, maintenance of good oxygenation and blood pressure is paramount. This is due to the respiratory compromise, as we have already told, when there is a high spinal cord injury and use of the ventilator. The risk for atelectasis is 36.4 and pneumonia is 31.4. So, a patient who is having a spinal cord injury should be given chest physiotherapy and vigilance for pneumonia prevention. That is, we should prevent the pneumonia with early antibiotics. That meaning the patients from the ventilator may be difficult and tracheostomy may be needed after weaning off. A mean arterial pressure of 85 to 90 mmHg should be targeted for the initial 7 days following injury, as there is level 2 evidence of a benefit to neurological outcome. So, medication for gastric protection, we have to add the patient on proton pump inhibitors or a histamine H2 receptor agonist is required due to high risk of stress ulcers for this patient. The prevalence of stress ulcers in patients with spinal cord injury, even with prophylaxis, is 6.2%. And the nutrition of the patient is also important. Ideally, enteral feeding is favored more than parenteral feeding. It should be commenced as soon as possible to prevent stress ulcers formation and support. It will be supporting the recovery. So, for a patient who is having prolonged bed rest, the venous thromboembolism is an anticipated damage. So, prophylaxis is an important tool for patients who are immobilized and may have motor deficits and are at a risk of coagulopathy. The mechanical devices like rotating beds, pneumatic compression boots, and thromboembolic deterrent stockings can also be used immediately. For pharmaceutical prophylaxis with a low molecular weight heparin, unfractionated heparin or oral anticoagulants can also be given. So, for any patient who is having a suspected venous thromboembolism, the pharmaceutical prophylaxis should be started within 72 hours. This will be reducing the risk of thromboembolism. Some patients may require an IVC filter that prevents the pulmonary emboli in the context of a deep vein thrombosis, where there is a contraindication to anticoagulation. This is because they increase the risk of deep vein thrombosis, and as there is no evidence that they reduce the rate of pulmonary embolism or the mortality following a spinal cord injury. And some patients may also require neuroprotective therapies. This is a controversial topic. First is the neuroprotective therapy can be given by two ways. First is IV steroid, that is the medial prednisolone, and hypothermia can also be used. The medial prednisolone has been shown to have a potential benefit in the post HSC analysis of 2 phase 3 trials of, and it is still remain controversial. The medial prednisolone is a corticosteroid that acts as a agent which preventing the inflammation. Despite this, the incidence of sepsis was significantly great. Fillings and co-workers study demonstrated a reduced complication rate in the group given a 24-hour regimen of medial prednisolone. That is, for any patient who is admitted, 30 milligram per kilogram bolus dose is given in the first 1 hour and followed by a 23 hours infusion should be given at a rate of 5.4 milligram per kilogram. For a patient with acute spinal cord injury, should be given 24-hour infusion of high-dose medial prednisolone. If the therapy can be administered within 8 hours of the injury. But the patient with the acute spinal cord injury in whom administration could not be commenced within 8 hours should not receive this therapy. Against the use of 48 hours infusion of high dose methylprednisolone in the context of acute spinal cord injury due to increased association of adverse effects. Hypothermia is another modality that can be used for neuroprotective action. Hypothermia has shown promising result in animal models with theoretical reduction in the inflammation, edema, excitotoxicity, and apoptosis. Small phase 1 human studies have shown potential improvement in neurological outcome with the application of hypothermia to patients with acute spinal cord injury. The optimum time window for interventions and the duration of interventions are not known. It use, its use remains experimental and further research is required to evaluate whether the hypothermia has any impact on the outcome of spinal cord injuries. And coming to the treatment option for unstable spine, for an unstable spine, we can go for a surgical or a non-surgical treatment. The choice of the treatment is depending upon the extent of the injury, level of the injury, whether surgical decompression is required or not, the surgeon's experience, the patient's clinical state and comorbidities, and patient wishes. There will be coming to the closed immobilization of the patient or external immobilization of the spine, which is this include bed rest and external cervical orthos like Aspens or Miami J collar, a halo cervical brace or a various thoracolumbar braces is also available. Even if the patient is having a closed immobilization without any surgery, the patient can have a lot of complications. The complication can be, first of all, due to the bed rest, that is due to the high risk of DVT, pulmonary embolism, chest infections, pressure ulcers, or muscle wasting can happen. Due to the cervical collars, the patient can have pressure sores, occipital neuralgia, and may predispose to patients to a greater fall risk, as their neck motion is restricted. The halo cervical base is having a halo ring attached to the skull with a pin. So, since there is a pin which is attached to the skull, there can be a pin site infection. This including skin infection, and if the bone and dura is breached, meningitis can even happen. Extradural hematoma or psychosocial complication of being confined to the base can also be associated with a halo cervical base. For in the case of a thoracolumbar basis, it can also cause skin ulcers, deconditioning of the paraspinal and abdominal musculature, and can restrict the thoracic cage and abdominal motion with the pulmonary complication like dyspnea, dizziness, reduced exercise tolerance, and consequently reduced complaints with the bracing therapy can happen. So it may be a valid option in the polytrauma patient who requires a long stay on ICU in the patients with lower limb fractures that prohibit the weight bearing. Then coming to the surgical immobilization of the spine. This is to stabilize the fracture site in order to promote the fusion across the injured level. The aim of the surgery is two. First is realignment of the spine, second is decompression. The realignment of spine into the usual anatomical position and achieve stability when the injury has caused instability. Secondly, the is that if the imaging demonstrates an abnormal compression of the neural structures by disc, hematoma, or fracture fragments. In a study done by Phillips and co-workers, they have assessed 313 patients with subaxial cervical spinal cord injury who is having a cord compression and noted on imaging. They reported that 6 months post injury, 19.8% of the patients with early decompression, that is 24 hours before within the following injury, had a 2-grade or better improvement on the ASIA scale compared to other patients who is decompressed after 24 hours of the injury. They have only 8.8% improvement. Surgical options available for C-spine is anterior approach, posterior approach, and a combined approach. In the case of an anterior approach, we can do a discectomy or corpectomy, and a plate is placed following by this. This is to straddle the region operated on and immobilize the vertebral bodies across the injured segment. In a posterior approach, laminectomy can be performed to decompress the spine, followed by a posterior instrumentation with the screws and rods to immobilize and allow fusion. In the case of a cervical facial dislocation with a neurological deficit, there is a strong recommendation for early intervention. This is in order to rapidly reduce the deformity caused by the injury. But there are reports which worsening neurological status during and during and after close reduction. MRI is helpful prior to this close reduction if practicably done. This is to look for radiological evidence of disc disruption. So, anterior cervical discectomy can be performed before the dislocation is reduced surgically. This is the radiograph. A lateral radiograph demonstrating the bilateral burst phases of C5 to and C6. The figure 3 is a sample reformation image, and which is demonstrating a C5 to C6 phase disruption. In the case of a closed reduction, the closed reduction is usually done under full guidance with Gardner selling stones under analgesia and minimal sedation. This minimal sedation is very important because the patients should feel comfortable, and we should be able to do a neurological examination post procedure. The initial weight of fraction should be low. In the case of an underacademic instability at the cranial, cervical, or then axial junction, then after this initial small weight application, gradually the application of the weight will be increased. Usually, increment of around 5 kg is performed while monitoring the radiological finding and the patient's neurological examination finding until enough traction is applied to achieve the reduction. In the case of a thoracic region, posterior instrumentation or a laminectomy are the most common utilized surgical procedures. Because here the ribcage and the sternum should be thought as a fourth column, it will be adding to the stability of the spine. The presence of significant rib or sternal fractures may potentiate the instability. Moreover, there are important considerations from the anesthetic point of view when placing the patient in a prone position for surgery. Lateral and anterior approach of the thoracic spine can also be utilized, but this is having a higher risk. Coming to the rehabilitation of the patient, after spinal cord injury is a vital part. The spinal cord injury, for a spinal injury, physician, nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, social workers, and speech and language therapists may be required. The goal of rehabilitation centers around minimal or preventing spinal cord injury related complication enhances function and supporting patients manage their lives with a new disability. Under the physical therapy is very vital because its objectives are strengthening, building to try and optimize upper limb factors, functions, and or mobility. Respiratory and cardiovascular training, muscle stretching to prevent the contractures should be done. An approach used by physiotherapy to improve mobility is weight supported locomotor training. In this, the patient's weight is supported as they attempt to mobilize. Coming to the last part of the complication, there can be two complications. First is systemic complication, second is local complication. Under systemic complication, there will be a complication to the cardiac system, that is the sympathetic outflow can lead to hypotension. But it will be improved over time. It may take 1 or weeks to months, but may become chronic and require managing compression stockings or volume support. Under respiratory system, paralysis of the intercostal muscles and the phrenic nerve can reduce lung capacity and lead to recurrent respiratory infections. In genitourinary gastrointestinal system, the impairment of innervation of the bladder muscles and sphincter can lead to inability to empty the bladder, or urinary incontinence can happen. This will lead to recurrent infection to the patient, disrupt the patient's ability to empty their bowel. To address this problem, the patient may require fiber supplements, digital disinfection, and suppositories. Then there will be an autonomic dysreflexia. That is, it is an emergency. It can occur in patients with spinal cord injuries above T6. A noxious stimulus, for example, urinary tract infection below the level of the spinal cord injury. This causes an overstimulation of the sympathetic system, causing acute hypertension. Along with this, there is an increased parasympathetic outflow above the spinal cord injury, causing vasodilation, leading to headache and flushing. The treatment is purely based upon the logic, that is, first is we have to remove the noxious stimulus. Second one is we have to support the patient with the pharmacological agents to decrease the hypertension. Other complications include pressure ulcers. There are the major systemic complications of spinal cord injuries and can be life-threatening if not prevented or managed early. The commonest type, as we already know, is buttocks, lateral thighs, and sacrum. Patients with spinal cord injury require regular skin inspection and then active management of if the evidence of ulcers emerges, including regular dressing, debridement, and infection treatment. Local complications include syringomyelia spasticity. Syringomyelia is a condition in which the fluid filled cavity within the spinal cord occurs in around 3% of the patients with spinal cord injury. Syringomyelia can grow to span multiple spinal levels. The management depends on the patient's neurological status. If the patient are asymptomatic, then the syringomyelia can be monitored clinically and radiologically. In the patient who is having a progressive neurological decline, syringomyelia can be decompressed by connecting the syringe to the fecal space using a syringo subarachnoid stent. Spasticity is the velocity dependent increase in muscle tone, and it can be seen in 78% of the patients with spinal cord injury. Spasticity can significantly impact the mobility and function of the patient. In order to achieve the spasticity, the patient should be given physical therapy, that is physiotherapy, and pharmaceutical agents can also be given. The patient can be given GABA, that is gamma glutamic acid drug, that is baclofen, or local botulinum toxin injection can also be given. The neurological recovery of the patient with a spinal cord injury is variable, but depend on the level of the injury and the severity. Patient shows recovery up to 6 months after the injury, but further recovery has been observed several years later. In general, the thoracic spine injuries having a worse motor recovery compared to cervical and lumbar injuries. The ability to walk in an is an important outcome measurement, and it is poor in patients with a complete spinal cord injury. Within the first year, the mortality rate of the patient is 3.8. This risk is related to the level of the level and completeness of the spinal cord injury and the other injuries sustained by the patient. And of course, the comorbidities of the patient is related to the life expectancy of the patient. Despite specialized treatments and the best spinal cord injury is short, and a greater age at the time of injury. Depending on these factors, the patient with a spinal cord injury has a life expectancy of 18.1 to 88.4 of that of a mass member of general population. The quality of the life is hugely multifactorial and it needs a good support network is an integral part of this. Specialized spinal injury centers can help you coordinate their support during and following the early stages of rehabilitation as the patient is back into society after a period of hospitalization. Related to mental health, social support, ability to ambulate, employment opportunities, and opportunities for social integration should also be given for this patient. The impact on patient's partner and family members should also be overlooked, with high rate of depression and stress in caregivers whose lives is changed dramatically. Patients' reported quality of life tends to improve with time for the initial spinal cord injury as they adjust to their circumstances. So, concluding the topic, the traumatic spinal cord injury is a potential devastating injury or a disease with lasting effects on the individual and wider society. Despite advances over the last few decades, much more still need to be done to improve the plight of these patients. Excellent initial resuscitation in order to avoid hypoxemia and hypotension is paramount to reduce the impact of secondary injury to neural tissue. Further management is in a dedicated spinal injury units provide the individual with the greatest level of immediate and also the fulfilling life. The future research will aim to prevent spinal cord injury in the first instance that minimize progression of the cord injury following trauma and clarify whether certain subpopulation of spinal cord injury benefit for urgent decompression and focus on strategies to improve rehabilitation post-injury in order to maximize these patients' quality of life. Thank you.
And another thing is when it is stable and there is no, that is the routine thing. The usual majority of the spinal injuries, not the cord, without neurological deficit, which is stable. Stable in the sense the only anterior column, the compression of the anterior column is only is there. Then what is the regime? Which the regime I am little what I do is ask you to, I will be giving a traction for 1 week, and then by that time I will arrange for a brace and I will make them walk on the second week. I think that is not been well accepted. I want to know others' opinion also regarding stable, uncomplicated spine injuries without cord damage.
I have one strong comment and criticism to make. The reason is it's such a big topic, can't be covered in 1 hour. The important aspects have to be settled separately. I don't know, somebody had perhaps taken up in a soup and asked him to cover the entire spinal cord these injuries in one go. In fact, it is one institution for spinal cord injuries. It's not just one topic, it's one institution. Understand? And I have a feeling that this is something which is neglected by our orthopedic community. We are all interested in fixing them and forgetting about them. That's my strong comment about it. Fix them and forget them. That's what is happening. They are going to live. Since so many undergraduates are listening, there must be some mention about how to suspect a patient with spinal cord injury, how to move them till you get help. Because moving patients with spinal cord injury without causing further damage using Hippocrates dictum, at first do no harm, primum non nocere re. So it has to be done under supervision, and then appropriate X-rays and other evaluations must be done to establish a diagnosis. I would strongly recommend our postgraduate students to accompany patients to the X-ray department if the patient comes without a definite neurology and a suspected spinal cord injury. Because such patients, you could save him from a catastrophic damage to the spinal cord by supervising the patient transfer from trolley to table, table to trolley, trolley to bed, etc. But these are areas where it can be catastrophic with disastrous complications. So moving patients with spinal cord injury is very important. Suspecting the patient is to be having a separate, spinal cord injury. And then, of course, going in for investigations depending upon the patient's general condition and associated injuries, etc. One important point I wanted to mention is if the patient is having spinal shock, he will be usually having a bradycardia. Rather than a hypovolemic shock, you find the patient with a severe tachycardia. That is something which should be recognized in the casualty itself. Then the rest of the things, of course, today's topic, concept is fix them and mobilize them. And there should be separate rehabilitation centers which are catering to the needs. I don't want to go into such details in a short span of time. I personally would suggest the postgraduates to divide the topic into several sections. Classification itself may be asked as a essay in the PG examination. Rehabilitation of a paraplegic might be asked as an essay in the trauma series paper. So all these things must be separately considered. And reading a cervical spine X-ray lateral view, when you suspect that there is a spinal cord damage, potential vertebral damage and causing spinal cord injuries, all those things must be separately dealt with. You cannot deal with this such a vast topic in an hour. It should be divided into at least 2-3 topics so that one can do justice to them. So think about that. But you have introduced it as a last exhaustive study, but we'll have to divide it into several parts and learn about it. But that's very important. That's all I wanted to add.
What is expected is a pragmatic approach. How you are going to approach a patient coming to the casualty with suspected spinal cord injury. That is the situation. Your presentation should be in that context. Initially when the patient is coming, what will you do? So our starting point should be like that. So what are you supposed to do first? First, you have to assess the patient based on the ATLS protocol. Then you have to follow there is a guideline for the spinal cord injury elsewhere. That is BOSS guideline 2. That means you have to assess the spinal cord injury properly. Then you have to think about spine clearance. Then you have to think about classification of the spinal cord injuries and the thoracolumbar spine injuries. So first point is ATLS protocol. Second is the BOS guideline 2. That means that is very simple actually. The initial assessment include 4 or 5 points. One is you have to look the patient and assess the patient and find out what ASIA classification patient is coming in. That can be a complete or incomplete one or a no spinal cord injury. Then you have to find out whether the patient is having a hypovolemic shock or a neurogenic shock. The pulse will be the point. Then you have to see whether the patient is in a spinal shock or not. So there comes the bulbocavernous reflex. Then comes the investigations. Then your initial management is actually protection. You have to protect the skin. You have to protect the bowel and bladder. You have to protect the GI tract. You have to protect the spinal cord from secondary injuries. These are the protection parts. Once these things are done, then you have to classify based on the Telix or Vaccaro classification. Then only further discussions come. Can you go back to the cross section of the spinal cord? Can you draw this picture? Are you able to see my screen? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
You can draw like this. So you have got the gray matter and the white matter. And what are the, this is, here it is. Okay. What are the columns? This is the posterior part. You have got the posterior column. Then you have got the lateral part. You have got 2 tracts. One is lateral corticospinal tract. You have got the lateral spinothalamic tract. Here you have got 2 tracts. That is anterior. Anteriorly you have got the vessel. You have got the anterior corticospinal tract and the lateral corticospinal tract. Corticospinal means it is the control. It is coming from the upper story. So it is control. Anterior means the trunk control. Lateral means limb control. Okay. Then you have got the spinothalamic. Thalamic means pain and temperature. The anterior spinothalamic means it is touch. Posterior column is proprioception and a light touch. If you see Brown-Sequard syndrome, then you have got the central cord syndrome, posterior cord syndrome, anterior cord syndrome. Which one is having the best prognosis? Which one is having the worst prognosis? The anterior cord syndrome has got the worst prognosis because we have got only the one vessel, which can also be injured. Okay, posteriorly you have got 2 vessels. Here comes the spinal nerve. You have got the dorsal column, the dorsal root and the ventral root. So this is the anatomy part. Then you have got the 3-column concept. That also you should be able to draw. If you want to quickly draw that, this is the spine segment and you have got the, can you label it? This is the vertebral body. This is another vertebral body. You have got the posterior longitudinal ligament. You have got the supraspinous ligament, interspinous ligament, then ligamentum flavum. You have got the anterior. So you divide that into 3 columns. This is the anterior column. This is the posterior column. This entire part is the posterior column. This is of interest because if that is injured, the patient is having a injury which requires fixation. So what are the structures that are coming in the posterior column, Abhilash? Abhilash, are you there? Tony?
Face injury.
Okay, face joint.
Spinous process, transverse process.
Okay, spinous process. You have got the transverse process. Then the
The ligamentum flavum.
ligamentum flavum അതിന് മുമ്പുള്ള എന്തെങ്കിലും വരുന്നുണ്ടോ? ഏറ്റവും തുടക്കം എവിടെ നിന്നാണ്? Where it is
Supraspinous
start? No, it is
interspinous
starting
and
from the
supraspinous.
posterior longitudinal ligament. The posterior ligament is also included in the posterior column. Then you have got the ligamentum flavum, the interspinous ligament, supraspinous ligament. All these ligaments are coming under the posterior column. Then you have got the spinous process and the facet joints. Okay, you should know this. That is called Danish classification. Okay, how will you find out from the X-ray whether it is a burst fracture or not? The middle column is involved means that is burst fracture. Okay, so how will you know from the X-ray it is a burst fracture or not?
Sorry, increased interpedicular distance.
From the AP view, you can see there is an increased interpedicular distance. So you should be knowing these practical points. So your approach should be ATLS, then assess spinal cord injury, spine clearance. You should mention something about spine clearance. What is spine clearance? Do you know Nexus score? What do you mean by spine clearance? When you suspect a spinal cord injury, you will be immobilizing the patient. If you immobilize the patient for more than 48 hours, that itself can produce problems. So you have to clear the patient of the spinal cord injury and take him off the immobilizer. Okay, that is called spine clearance. So what are the points you are supposed to look for spine clearance? For anybody?
Cervical spine tenderness, median cervical.
Cervical spine tenderness. So you look for cervical spine tenderness. You can start from upper story. Whether the patient is conscious oriented or not. That is the first point. Whether the patient is intoxicated, then you have to palpate for the spinal tenderness. Then look for any distracting major injuries. Okay, if all these points are excluded, you can clear the patient of the spinal cord injury. So have you understood what I am telling?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then about the stability of the spine. According to White and Punjabi, if the patient is able to bear physiological load without developing pain or neurological complications, the spine is stable. So then you can actually mobilize the patient very early. So if your assessment is correct, no problems will be happening. So your point is finding out whether the spine is stable or not. There comes the Vaccaro classification. So the Vaccaro or Telix classification. So you find out the pattern of the vertebral body injury. That can be a compression, distraction, or translation. That means when you move from compression to translation, you are moving from a less severe injury to a more severe injury. Then you are finding out whether the patient is having neurological deficit or not. So a root injury is very minor. A Cordaichner syndrome or an incomplete spinal cord injury is a major thing. So you will give more points for that. Then you take an MRI if you strongly suspect and find out the posterior elements are involved or not. Then so total point is 10. If the patient is having 5 points or more, the spine is unstable. So you have to dress the spine. DRES means decompress, realign, and stabilize. So that is the principle behind the treatment of any spinal cord injury. Wilson sir, anything to add? Dijo, Leo.
I think as Prakash said, it is an extensive topic, difficult to be covered in such a short span of time. What I would like to say, the fate of a transected cord is decided at the time of injury. So whatever management you do is to prevent further damage, stabilize and help in recovery of partially injured segments. But the fate of the cord is decided at the time of the injury. This should be borne in mind when you communicate with the relatives of the patient. You cannot work wonders by surgery, but you can help to some extent by surgery. Second point is the depomedrol was very much praised for quite a long time, but it is debatable at present. Still, I feel it is preferable to give in acute spinal cord injury a depomedrol course because it can have some benefit in the uninjured nerve segments.
That is especially true in case of cervical spine injury. There is definite indication for giving a steroid in case of cervical spine injury.
One proved condition where there is benefit is central cord syndrome following cervical trauma is believed to have some response to steroids.
Okay, can you tell C5 where are you supposed to
lateral എത്തിക്കൊണ്ട്
it is at then this is the tip of the volar aspect of the thumb, C6. C7, volar aspect of the middle phalanx of the middle finger. C8,
Sir, C8 can be checked by checking the sensation of the little finger.
is a specific spot. It is not can be. It should be touched on the
Volar aspect of the little
volar aspect of the tip of the little finger.
finger. Yes.
Then T1, where are you supposed to touch?
Sir,
Okay. Then L2, it is middle aspect of the middle of the thigh. Then L3, it is the middle aspect of the knee joint. Then L4, it is medial malleolus. L5, it is the first web space. S1, it is the lateral aspect of the heel. So you should know which are the specific spots. It is not can be. It is actually the, should be. There are specific points you should be touching when you are doing an initial assessment of the spinal cord injury. Okay, that can be used for your neurological examination in case of a any sensory examination. Okay, be learned. Similarly, there is specific method for motor examination. So you should be looking for that. You should go for the specifics. You should not be very superficial. All these things are very specific. Okay. If there are no other points, we can call it a day.